Right? Great. Well, first, can I just say how fun it was to realize, yeah, you may not know this, but Zoom effectively cancels out all drumming. So I all saw you moving in rhythm, but I couldn't hear a thing. But it was fun to get out my drum and be able to make a little noise on this side of the planet while you're on Sunday morning and I'm on Saturday night. And can I also say it was an absolute delight to hear Joel. Joel, I can't remember where it was the last time I saw you, but what a delight to hear you, and just a real treat for me. And thanks to all of you, to the organizers who invited me. This has been a joy, and my sort of zooming in, though brief, has been rich and wonderful for me. I'm going to share my screen with you. And let me just say, don't worry about taking any notes or anything like that, because I'm going to, I'll send these slides and they can be shared with, with the whole group if they would be useful. Uh, um, Yesterday, well, actually, before I start, I want to tell you a story. Oh my goodness, this would be many years ago now. My third born son is turning 40 years old, and this happened when he was about 10. So this was 30 years ago. My son, his name is Trevor. He was diagnosed with leukemia at the age of 6, and he had intermediate risk that was diagnosed very late. And so it was a very scary time. He had 3.5 years of daily chemotherapy, uh, monthly bone marrow aspirations, periodic spinal infusions, and especially the first 10 months or so were were pretty scary. Uh, and he was maybe 3 years into his treatment, and he couldn't go to school because there was a lot of chicken pox going around, and the chemo had wiped out his immune system, and chicken pox would have been life threatening. So he was studying at home and had a tutor coming in, and I got a call from a friend of mine who ran a summer camp, and he said, and this is a camp that had horses, and he said, I just got a whole new herd of horses in, and I don't want to put children on them this summer until I've had a chance to really test them first. He said, so I'm going to take a 4-day trail ride. We'll leave the farm where the summer camp was, and we will cross one paved road. And then for 4 days, we'll be in the wilderness in north central Pennsylvania. Some of you might know where that is, but it is a beautiful remote area in the Appalachian Mountains. And he said, I know you love to ride. Would you want to come with us? And I said, well, I'd love to come. And then I thought that about my son Trevor being at home. I said, um, uh, any chance my son could come? And, he could, he's not experienced in riding, but with 4 days, he'd get good at it. And my friend said, yeah, that'd be great. And he sort of made a deal with everybody. If anyone was sick, they would let us know. And at the last minute, he wouldn't come, but everybody was healthy. And I think it was about 14 of us that set off on the trail to ride those horses. I won't go into the details. I won't tell you about how the first day we got lost. We headed off and we were going to rendezvous with a trailer that had hay for the horses and food for us and our tents for the night. And we headed off into the mountains and we couldn't find the trailer. So we were on our horses for 9 hours straight, and we couldn't afford to stop and rest because we needed to get to that trailer. We eventually found it. But when we got off those horses, let me just say that I hurt in parts of my anatomy. I didn't know it was possible to feel pain. and and so we made it through that day, and we were so sore when we got it up the next morning, but we got on the horses again. And I think we were about halfway through day 3, and I realized something. I realized that we human beings were kind of an annoyance to the horses. It wasn't like they were saying, wow, we're really glad to give you guys a ride. They were totally keyed into each other. And these horses were not experienced on a trail together. So they were getting used to each other and they were establishing dominance hierarchies. And you started to realize that every moment their ears were moving and they were sending messages to the horses before them and behind them. And the slightest move of the head, the slightest twitching of the butt, I sort of had a feeling that the horse in front of me was just farting an awful lot as a way to show how much he didn't like the horse I was riding. You'd find out that this horse didn't like that horse, and that horse wanted to be in front of that horse, and this horse really wanted to be beside that horse. And it was just fascinating watching and realizing that horses are herd animals. And of course, it didn't take long sitting on the horse to think, and so are we human beings. We're keyed into each other and we're connected to each other, and we are herd animals. And one of the challenges in our lives is the challenge of figuring out how to balance being part of a group and how to balance that with being a genuine individual. Uh, how can I be the unique me that I'm supposed to be? How can I be a productive part of a group? Figuring that out is one of the challenges of life. So the metaphor we used for this yesterday, I told you that I'm trying to find new language to help me understand what's actually going on inside this body of mine. And we use this metaphor of an internal board of directors, or I think you would say a board of governors. And the reason I wanted to use this image is that it's plural. It's not one, it's not a monarchy. It's not just a top-down organization. There are so many parts to me, trillions of cells organized in many organs, those organs organized in systems. And then they organize, I think, in these three committees. And the first we talked about was the survival committee. And Joel, what you said about how many of our religious institutions teach us to fear or hate or downgrade or denigrate our bodies. And part of the liberation that we need is to rediscover the amazing gift of having a body. What an amazing thing it is to have a body, to be able to dance with or without clothes, under the stars or not, to be able to run and play sports and have prowess and skill in music or engineering or whatever it is. To have a body is an amazing thing. And thank you so much for that incredible spoken word that helped us feel the joy of having a body. And that survival committee has a part of our brain that then is connected to every part of our body. And the old idea that you have a soul and a spirit that were a soul and a body that were so easily separated. Look, any of you who've helped a parent go through their last years with dementia know that those kinds of divisions are not accurate. Or any of you who have had someone you love or in your own life who had mental illness, and you found out that the biochemistry had so much to do with the mental state they or you have been in. That survival committee is what connects us to our body. And then it's connected to that belonging committee, that part of us that's like that herd of horses. And it might help us if we realize that if you put your survival committee and your belonging committee together, that's kind of like the horse. And the part of you that you think of as your brain, that's conscious of itself, but very often not conscious of the herd part of us, the belonging committee, or the survival part of us, then you realize that at best, our little brain is like a little person trying to control a great big powerful horse. We have to live as one unit instead of separating ourselves from the totality of who we are. And we talked about how we have a left wing and a right wing, and that part of the challenge of our lives is learning not only how to control and manage and curate and love and appreciate the complexity that's in us, but also to realize how we're wired in with other members of our herd, other members of our tribe, other members of our city or town or religion or species. And that how a ripple that goes out from one of us touches all the others, and how interconnected we are. And so we're learning how to see reality. We're learning how to see ourselves. We're learning how to see what life is all about. in these amazing bodies that have evolved over so long and have come to this place where we're conscious of ourselves and conscious of time and dare to dream and think about things like meaning in our lives and the depth and height and breadth of the wonder of being alive. Um, One of the things that happens when we become aware of this is we realize that our capacity to reason clearly and arrive at the truth is very limited, and that we have a lot working against us in getting to reality and getting to the truth. Let me say it this way: never underestimate your power to be wrong. Um, and all of us have these glitches. Remember, I said yesterday that our what we think of, what I'm calling the meaning committee, and what we often call our rationality, is actually the least evolved part of our brain. It's the newest kid on the block, and it's still filled with a lot of glitches. And those glitches actually have evolved to help us survive, but they don't always help us face reality. And the word we use for those glitches is biases. They're fast, unconscious mental shortcuts that help us save energy or avoid discomfort by bypassing conscious thought. And our biases render us very vulnerable to self delusion and to being deluded or misled by other people. Over the years, I've started trying to collect biases, and I've tried to sort of organize them. Being an old preacher, I managed to wrestle them into an alliterated list. And I thought what I would do in these next few minutes is just give you an overview, a high altitude flyover of some of the biases that we face. I don't expect you to remember any of them. If you remember one, that's great. We can give you these notes. I have a podcast called Learning How to See where I go into these. And if you go on my website, I actually have a little ebook if you're interested. But the big idea here is that if you can just get this sense that there's a lot working against us, seeing and knowing the truth, I think that will be a really worthwhile takeaway. And hopefully we'll get some ideas on what to do with it. These biases make us misunderstand reality, and they make us misunderstand each other. The first one is probably the most powerful and most well known. It's called confirmation bias. Our story or system excludes what doesn't fit because we judge new information based on the ease with which it fits in with the only standards we have: old information and trusted authorities. In other words, everything I'm saying right now, your brain, faster than you can even realize it, is saying, does this fit in with what I already think? Or does this go in conflict to what I already think? And if it fits in, you welcome it. And if it feels like it's in conflict, before you can even evaluate it, you push it away. You have an emotional reaction. I don't like that. That doesn't work for me. Now, you might be right and I might be wrong, but the way this confirmation bias works is it gives us an emotionally negative reaction to things that we don't want to hear. Another one is complexity bias. Our brains prefer a simple myth to a complex truth. We prefer a simple lie to a complex truth. That's complexity bias. Another is community bias. It's almost impossible to see what our community doesn't see. When, for example, religious authorities or political authorities or our parents or grandparents or some nun or teacher in school, they sort of got into our head, and they represent this sort of little people sitting on our shoulders, speaking into our ear, saying, you can't accept that idea. That doesn't fit in with our group. That's not allowed here. Don't think that way. If you're religious, that's heretical. That's liberal or conservative or whatever, depending on the group you're in politically. Community bias is super, super powerful. So much more we could say about that. And by the way, if you want to ask questions about any of these later, it'd be great to talk about them. Complementarity bias says this: if you are hostile to my ideas, if you seem hostile to me, then I will be hostile to you I won't give you a fair chance if I don't think you're giving me a fair chance. And if you do show that you like me, I will be open to your ideas. There's another one called competency bias. This is also known as the Dunning-Kruger hypothesis in education. And it's a really interesting one. This is one to really think about. We don't know how little or much we know because we don't know how much or little others know. So if you ask a person who's really ignorant about something, what is your knowledge on uh, Einstein's quantum theory? And you would say, well, I probably have about the average knowledge that anybody has. Or what's your knowledge about uh, the current state of football in South Africa, you'd say, well, I probably know about as much as the average person. Um, and the truth is, you have no idea how many people know so much more than you. On the other hand, you might know a lot about something, but you don't really know how little other people know about it. It's very hard for us to gauge how much we know about anything. Consciousness bias is the next, that depending on my level of consciousness, some of you might be familiar with Richard Rohr. He talks about first half of life, second half of life. A little later in his own work, he took those two categories and broke them into three: order, disorder, and reorder. Depending on if you're in the order consciousness stage or the disorder stage or the reorder stage. I've written about this: simplicity, complexity, perplexity, or harmony. Depending on where you are in your own development, there are certain things you just can't see. You can't understand it. It's not that you're not smart, it's that your brain hasn't yet, and I shouldn't just say your brain, but your board of governors hasn't figured out how to engage with certain realities yet. Another is comfort bias. I prefer not to have my comfort disturbed. If a lot of this discomfort, pain, or inconvenience comes with acknowledging something, I have this way of pushing it away and not paying attention to it. Another is conservative liberal bias. People have social psychologists have learned that if you test people psychologically in more conservative or more liberal political parties, what you'll find is that everybody it has about six different kinds of moral reasoning: um, fairness and kindness, purity, loyalty, liberty, and authority. But what happens is liberals really emphasize fairness and kindness. Very often, more liberal people are suspicious of purity, loyalty, liberty, and authority as moral standards because they see them so often used against fairness and kindness. Conservatives don't really see that. They kind of see fairness and kindness as being more or less equal to purity, loyalty, liberty, and authority. There's a whole lot more we could say about this, but there's a good amount of research about this, that if I have sort of drifted to being part of a liberal community, it really affects what I can see in the world. And if I've drifted, I'm part of a conservative community, it really affects how I see the world. There's something called catastrophe bias. I remember dramatic catastrophes, but I don't easily notice gradual improvement or gradual decay. This is that old myth about the frog in the boiling water. I don't think that's actually true, but it makes a good story, and it illustrates it, that if you slowly heat up the water, we don't jump out. We don't notice that it's getting hot when it happens very slowly. Contact bias. When people lack meaningful contact with the other, their own prejudices and false assumptions about the other go unchallenged. So if I've just never met a certain kind of person, I believe the prejudices I've been told about them. And even when I meet them, for a while, my confirmation bias will keep me from even rethinking those biases. But with increased contact, I start to see people for who or what they are. Confidence bias. We're attracted to confidence, even if it is false. We prefer the bold lie to the nuanced truth. And this is, by the way, something that I and my country have to pay a lot of attention to, because we actually have evidence that bold con artists can go very, very far. in our country and may do so again. Um, Cash bias. It is very hard to make someone see something when their way of making a living depends on them not seeing it. Enough said about that. A conspiracy bias. If I'm under stress or shame, and you tell me a story that casts me as a victim or as a or as an innocent person in this, and you cast somebody else as the villain, I will be very tempted to believe their story. I I want relief for my shame or guilt or fear. And you can tell me a conspiracy theory and my mind is attracted to it because if it casts me as an innocent person or a victim. Another one is constancy, normalcy, or baseline bias. Our brains set a baseline of normalcy as children. Uh, and we don't know what the world was like before us. Whatever's going on in our time, we consider as normal. And what this means is our normalcy standards get set, and it's very hard for us to adjust them later in life. There's certainty closure bias. Our brains find it difficult to rest with uncertainty, so we would rather reach closure even if that closure is optimistic or pessimistic. Overly optimistic, overly pessimistic. If it gives us closure, there's something attractive to us about that. And then one more, cleverness and deception bias. This one's so interesting to me. If you want to ask about it, I can give you some biological examples. But the idea is that we all are aware that other people might be deceiving us. And we want to be clever enough to outfox their attempts at deception. Um, and what this can mean is we can be so sure that other people are deceiving us that we don't believe people who actually are telling us the truth. Um, and we may develop a bias toward accepting the worst possible interpretation of anything because we don't want to be deceived. And this is sort of the bias of cynicism in some ways. Well, again, I don't think you need to remember any of these, certainly not all of them. But if you just keep in mind this idea that there are things in the way that our interior board of governors works that keeps us from dealing with reality. There are ways we deceive ourselves, there are ways we trick ourselves, and there are ways that we render ourselves vulnerable to other people deceiving us. But even what I just said, that people can't see what they can't see, that isn't the whole truth, because someone else can help you learn to see beyond your current biases. And this is why many of us discover in our lives a couple of teachers, a couple of mentors, a couple of examples, and we think, gosh, because of that person, I see things I never used to see before. They help me see more clearly. And you might wonder, well, how can I be one of those people who might be able to help other people see more clearly? Let me just give you 4 ideas. The first is some wisdom from Socrates. Socrates said, we have to be like midwives. And here's what he meant. He said, no woman wants to deliver her baby in public. The delivering of a baby is something you need to do in private, in a safe and private place. And he said, admitting that we're wrong and giving birth to a new idea or a new understanding is something that people often don't like to do in public. They need privacy to work through what's really at stake. They need time and they need privacy. Now, we've all seen salespeople, politicians, and preachers who pressure people and rush them and try to get them to change their mind. But if we take the wisdom from Socrates, what we'll do is we'll try to plant seeds for people. There might be another way to see this. I used to see it that way. I don't see it that way anymore. And then we just don't push. We just plant a little seed. And sometimes that's what it takes to get a person asking questions and thinking. Many of you know I used to be a preacher, and one of the things about Jesus is he loved to speak in parables. And I think this was his way of guiding messages around people's bias. He would tell them a story and he wouldn't explain the meaning. He would then let them go away and think about the meaning and let it simmer and let it work. And that might start them being curious. If they couldn't figure it out, they might come back and ask some questions, which would get them on a journey of curiosity rather than uh, confirmation bias where they already have all the answers. Or they might start to get it on their own. And then it becomes a self-discovery moment. Second one, second way so what that means is we sow seeds with people. We give them a little idea and then we push. We don't push. We back off and let them have some privacy to think about it more. Second is the courage to differ graciously. What I mean by this is when we hear someone say something that we think is probably not true or probably not wise, probably not helpful. I'll give you a little 5-word script that I think can help you help them. Wow, I see that differently. And those words are carefully chosen. Wow. That's a way of, instead of yelling and saying, I have strong feelings about this, we just say very calmly but firmly, wow, not you're an idiot, but I see that differently. By focusing on how you see, you give them a chance to focus on how they see. If you say to them, you're wrong, you will elicit all of their ego and all of their defenses and all of their pride. And what will they do? They'll dig their heels in more to say, no, I'm right. And you two will now be in a butting of heads, ego against ego. And learning almost never happens in those settings of ego against ego. When you say, wow, I see that differently, you're in a certain sense showing courage and grace. Courage to speak up, but grace to not push and not attack and not insult. And when you can say, wow, I see that differently, very often what people will say, you try this and you'll see it's true. Very often people will say, well, what do you mean? And the temptation will be to say, well, here's how I see it. And then it's ego against ego. What I recommend you do, if someone says, well, what do you mean? Unless it's emergency and you really have to deal with it, you might be able to say, well, listen, I don't want to go into it right now. I don't want to get into an argument with you. If you're ever curious about why I see it differently, ask me in private. I'd be glad to share with you how I came to see it differently, how I see it. You don't have to agree with me. I'm just offering you a different way. I'll tell you how I see it. But again, I'm not expecting you to agree. You understand, the more you give them space, that's the wisdom from Socrates. You give them an alternative vision. You do it with kindness. You do it with sensitivity. You don't try to antagonize their ego and their insecurity. You give them some space. Sometimes a person's pontificating about something, and you might ask them permission. Could I tell you a story about that? Because I have some experience with that. And I just experienced this recently. I said something, and someone else said, could I tell you a story about my own background with that? And I said, well, wow, you may know a lot more about this than I do. And suddenly, instead of it being, I was right, he was wrong, he's right, I'm wrong, it's, wow, if you have that kind of a background with this, I could learn a lot from you about it. And it just took us into a new space. And then fourth, if you can learn to say in front of other people, I don't know about that. I used to be a lot more sure about that than I am now. I have opinions, but I could be wrong. I think that is a way of you demonstrating to others that you continue to learn, you continue to think, you have an open heart and an open mind, and you're still thinking, and you're aware that you have biases, and you set an example for how that could be, how that could be true of them too. You've probably heard this story. My understanding is it's a Buddhist story that concerns an old Chinese farmer who every night would sit in a chair and watch the sun go down. And one day, as he was watching the sun go down, some of his neighbors came running to him and said, I have some great news for you. Your son was just out in the forest, and he found a horse, a beautiful stallion, and he's bringing it back, and it's just worth so much money, and it's a beautiful horse. You are so fortunate. And your son is so fortunate that he found this horse. And then the son came with this big, beautiful horse. And the people were just so happy. And they said, aren't you thrilled? And the old farmer said, well, maybe it's good. Maybe it's not. And the next day, as sun was setting, the old farmer was sitting watching the sunset. And his neighbors came and ran to him and they said, sir, we have some terrible news. That new horse that your son found, he was out riding him in the field, and the horse reared back and he fell off and fell on his back and broke his leg. And we're bringing him back to your house now. It's terrible. We're so sorry you had the terrible luck of finding that horse, and now your son having a broken leg. And the old farmer said, maybe it's bad, maybe it's not. And then the next day, one of the warlords from the area came into town, and he kidnapped and conscripted all the young men to go fight in a battle with him at sword point. Conscripted all the men, but because the man's son had a broken leg, he couldn't be taken away. And the people came after the warlord left, kidnapping all the sons. And the people said to the old man as the sun was setting, you are so fortunate. You are so lucky because your son found that horse and broke his leg. He couldn't be taken away into battle. And the old man said, you know what he said. And the story can go on and on and on. And the idea is that this old man who watched the sunset every day had gotten out of the need to make snap judgments, to make quick decisions, to put things in a simple category of good or bad. The man had learned to be able to withhold judgment and observe and take the long view. This is what I think Jesus was talking about when he said, the eye is the lamp of the body. So if your eye is healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is unhealthy, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light in you is darkness, how great is the darkness? If you look with biased eyes, if you aren't aware of how much your vision is constricted by your biases, it's going to bring real harm to all of your decision making. Everything that happens inside of you is affected by your ability to see. Do you just see in black and white, or do you see in color? Do you just see in a narrow frame, or do you have a wide frame? Do you only see what's in your close range view, or can you take the long view? Similarly, Jesus said, don't try to take the splinter out of your sister or brother's eye until you deal with the plank in your own eye. And so I think that's Jesus' way of saying, look, if you want to be a wise person, be aware that each of us have biases, that we can be wrong. And that will give you both humility and curiosity and openness. And it will, in a sense, make it possible for you to connect with other men in the circle around you, to connect with other men because you know they see some things you don't see, and you may see some things they don't see. And you become, in this sense, a kind of team of people, a community of people who see. I suppose one way to say it is, would we rather nurture and protect our biases and keep comfortable and keep things easy and the way we're used to? Or do we desire to see so deeply and so powerfully that we are willing to start facing the planks in our own eye? Um, eh, uh, and what I'd like to do now is take a few moments to lead us in a meditation, a few moments of silence. And what I'd like to invite you to do right now is to just get comfortable. If you want to just sort of shake your limbs out, and if you've been sitting still, you can move a little bit. Wouldn't hurt us to do another 10 minutes of drumming, but we won't do that now. And if you will get comfortable and get your feet flat on the ground, and if you will uh, take a couple of good deep breaths, we're going to invite you to go into a board meeting of your board of governors in your body in a couple of minutes. We're going to invite you to just take some quiet time to center down and to let this idea that we all have problems seeing, and we all have an invitation to deal with the planks of bias that are in our own eyes, and that we'll never have this. These are with us all the time. It's not like something we fix, but if we're aware of this, it enriches our life and gives us a greater ability, I think, to continually learn to see more and more clearly, more and more accurately. Uh, our dear friend Richard Rohr often says that contemplation is a long, loving look at the real, or that contemplation is bearing all the reality that we can bear, meeting all the reality that we can bear. And so, what I'd like to invite you to do, I'm going to lead you just in a short guided meditation for a few minutes, and then we'll go into a period of silence. And in that silence, just see what's there. Just and hold this little simple little phrase. I want to see. Yesterday we said, I am a person becoming. And today we'll invite you to say, I want to see. So if you'll close your eyes, let's just take 3 deep breaths together. And I'd like you to imagine that you're out in a public place where you live. Maybe it's a street, sidewalk, maybe it's at your office. And I'd like to imagine you see 2 people in an argument. Just try to picture 2 people arguing. Might be 2 men, it might be a man and woman, it might be 2 women, it might be some children having a fight. And you see them arguing. You see them waving their hands and pointing fingers, and you see their fists clenching. Each one is so sure he's right and the other one is wrong. And I wonder what you feel as you look at those people arguing. And now I'd like you to try to see one of those people as you. Try to see you in an argument. And you know how you feel in your body when you're sure you're right and the other person's wrong. When you have a way of seeing and thinking and the other person has contradicted it. When you have a very simple idea and the other person is trying to make it complex. When you see something in a very nuanced way and they're just black and white about it. Or you see it in a black and white way and they see all kinds of shades of gray. Try to see your face angry and fighting and arguing. Try to remember what it feels like in your body in those kinds of tense arguments. And imagine now that in the middle of an argument, you stop and you say, I wonder why I'm so angry. And then you say to the other person, I might be right, you might be right, but right now my ego is engaged, my pride is engaged, and I see you as an enemy. I don't want to see you as an enemy. I wonder if we could just take some time for me to go and cool off a little bit. And now I'd like to imagine you walking away and finding a place to sit. And you sit down and you go from the heat of an argument to the privacy of childbirth. And in you wants to be born a desire to see, not just a desire to be right. And for the next 4 minutes or so, I'd like to invite each of us in silence to just hold those words, I want to see. And if you want to go back to what we said yesterday, you could say, I am a person becoming, I want to see. If you're a person who prays, that could become a prayer. Please help me to see. And that prayer could unfold from there. So we'll go now into a few moments of silence. Well, brothers, as we pull back together, if I think we have a few minutes for some questions, and then we'll be going to small groups. Um, so thank you so much for your attention. Thank you for entering into that experience, and we can have some questions or have a comment to make. That would be fine too.
Hi, Brian. Thank you so much for your work. Really appreciate the impact that you've had on my life. I have a question about, can you see me there?
Yes. Yep.
About how you personally will deal with people, reconcile with people saying that you're wrong, or that you're maybe dangerous in some way, especially people from your tradition.
Yeah.
Preface this by saying that upon hearing that I was coming to hear you speak today, a friend of mine sent me a link saying, hey, this guy might not be a real Christian. And I just got so angry, and it was difficult
Yeah.
for me to respond level-headedly. It's like, no, there's something so beautiful here. I want you to be a part of it, but it was difficult for me to articulate um,
Yes.
get past that frustration. For someone who I'm sure that has been a part of your journey, I'd love to hear your
Mhm.
personal
Yeah.
response to that.
Well, thanks for that question. Um, so let me. I don't. I might mess up my words here, but let me give it a try. You know how there's that old saying, the golden rule: do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Well, when others are attacking you, sometimes the best thing to do is do unto others the opposite of what they're doing to you. And so, what that person is trying to do is to tell you what you're doing and thinking is unacceptable. And I'm going to put my pressure on it to try to attack it. And one of the things that helps me when I think about that internal board of directors, the board of governors, is I realize that their belonging committee, whatever they think, they might not even know what they think, but they know they're part of a group. And they know, for example, that maybe I'm a bad guy to the leaders of their group. And so, and they bought into the way that their group thinks. And so they're only being faithful members of their group. And maybe they consider you part of their group, and they're afraid if you think differently that that you won't want to be part of their group anymore, or that they won't want you to be part of their group anymore, because that's the way certain groups work. They make it very hard for anyone to think differently. And if what you're able to do at that moment, where they're putting the pressure on you to agree with them, and you say, I understand, you think I'm doing something very, very dangerous, and you think I really shouldn't be listening to this or attending this or participating in this. I understand. You probably think this is a slippery slope and it's going to lead me somewhere really, really terrible. You probably think that guy is just out for the money or just out for fame, or he's just deceived by the devil or something like that. And you say it, and you say it with no judgment and no insult. You say, so you're really trying to help me by telling me these things, and I understand that you are trying to help me, and I understand that this is how you feel. And thanks for telling me. I don't expect you to agree with me. I don't even expect you to understand. If you ever would like to understand what's of interest to me, not just to get into an argument, but if you're really sincere, I'd be glad to share it with you. But I just understand it on this, we see this differently, right? You give them the thing they're not giving you. They aren't giving you the space to be different. You give them the space to be different, the space to stay just like they are, and and to even consider you're a bad person now. You know, you think I'm a really terrible person for this. I understand. I understand. Now, it's very hard to do that if we depend on them or the group they're part of for us to know who we are. And this is one of the things that matures us through conflicts like that, because then we have to go into the privacy of our internal board of governors where we commune with each other. And for those of us who have faith in God, we commune with God, and we open ourselves to the truth that's beyond even our understanding. And we stay open and humble and curious. And if you wanted to take it one step farther, um, in giving them the opposite of what they're giving you judgment and advice, and they're giving you no curiosity. So you give them a little curiosity and say, I'm really curious. Why do you think that's so terrible? How many, I'm curious, have you read any of this person's books? Which one really bothered you the most? And you just create curiosity for them. You give them the gift they're not giving you. And that's not easy to do. But it once you do it once, it's easier the second time. And once you do it twice, it's way easier the 10th or 15th time, because you learn to disengage yourself. If I can say it this way, their community bias has been engaged, and they're trying to get your community bias to get engaged so it will get you back in line with the group that they're part of. It's understandable. It's how we work. You can't get mad at them. It's just how we human beings go. And by the way, it doesn't just apply in religion. It applies in politics. It applies in professional controversies and so on. So I hope that helps. It's not easy, but it gets easier. It gets easier.
Hi Brian, how you doing? Apologies for my croaky voice, I've had a bit of a cold. Um, my question for you is, as blokes, we're encouraged to be the strong ones and climb to the top of the mountain. And often when we get there, it's not what we thought it would be.
Yeah.
And we look around, and quite often the mountain falls away from under us, and we're back at the bottom in the dust. My question for you is, blokes that go through that and they're down the bottom, what's your advice to them to begin again, to find strength to
Yeah.
begin a new journey?
Yeah. Thanks for that question. Thanks for that question. And I don't think anyone would ask that question if that you didn't know what that was like, and maybe know other people in the room who also have a feeling for what that is like. Um, I think if we use that little board of governors metaphor, you might say, you might be able to kind of have a talk with yourself and say, my belonging, my sense of belonging has been shattered. I invested so much in belonging. And now either other people have taken that away from me, or we can be honest and say, I don't want to belong to that group who climbed that mountain together anymore. This is not the mountain I want to be on. And then, and there's grief and feeling I invested so much in that, and that's not where I want to be. Now, I think feeling that grief becomes super, super important. Um, Sometimes there's money involved. Getting to the top of this mountain is a way of making money. And for us to realize that freaks out our survival committee, because when we think about surviving, if money's involved, we wonder, how am I going to survive? And there's just something in stepping back and saying, okay, my survival and my fear are activated, and my hurt at being no longer being in sync with that herd that I used to belong to, or that tribe I used to belong to. And then to think, and I'm changing my thinking, and I feel alone in this, and I don't know where I'll fit in again. And I think taking the time to come to terms with the impact of this loss and this transition that you're going through, I think is super, super important. I observe myself when I'm in a place of grief. And one of the things that helps me move, and first of all, I don't think you can rush grief. In fact, I think the more you try to rush it, the longer it lasts, because you don't give yourself permission to feel it. And and it may be that if we give ourselves permission to feel it fully, it will really give us 5 really hard days in our life where we just give ourselves permission to feel terrible for 5 days. Look, if you break a leg, there's nothing you can do to make the leg heal in 3 days. It takes a long time for a leg to heal. So we, in a sense, to say, this is going to hurt and I can't rush it. But then once we feel that we've accepted that it's going to take some time, then we can begin to be curious. Curiosity takes us into a different part of our brains. If I can say it this way, it moves us from the left brain that is focused. How do I fix this? How do I make it better? How do I get over this? What do I do? We go over to the right side of the brain that's curious, and it opens up our uh, our imagination, and we start asking questions like, I wonder how I'm going to get through this. I wonder what new friends I'll find. I wonder who my new mentors and teachers can be. I wonder, and the I wonder place of our brain, it seems to me, becomes something positive that begins to fill the space as the grief subsides. And that curiosity is a healthier place to be. Um, Maybe the last thing I'll say, and there's so much more that could be said, and this is a great thing for all of you to talk about with each other. is that if you can find one friend, if you can find one friend who will give you the space to process what you're going through. And if you need to be angry, when they talk about the stages of grief, they talk about denial, they talk about anger, they talk about bargaining and depression before you get to acceptance. So understand, being angry is a part of grief. Bargaining, trying to make it work, fix it, it's a part of grief. Feeling really depressed is a part of grief. That means grief is working when you have those things. And have friends who say, yeah, I know you need to be pissed off. Look, if you need to cuss a whole lot and you need to say a bunch of things that tomorrow you'll admit aren't true, but it's your way of blowing off some steam, I'm listening. I'm not taking you seriously in the sense that I'm not going to hold you to what you're saying now. I know you need to express your anger. Man, that's good kinds of friends who can do that. So I hope that helps. And obviously, sometimes what we really need is a professional to help us that. And it's really worth it if you have somebody you can trust and you can pay to do that kind of work for you too. That's a great thing too. Hope that helps. I don't know how many more minutes we have time for questions. So someone else can tell me if we have time for more.
Evening, Brian. I want to say thank you for talking with us. And I wanted to say that your talk resonated deeply with me and has resonated deeply with things I've heard before. But I think there's a difference between I've heard these before and had them as beliefs in my head, as propositions in my head, but then having that be transformed into how I show up in the world is an ongoing issue with me. So I wanted to ask if there's any particular practices or things that you do to help move those things as propositions in your head into like how you
Yes.
show up in the world.
What a great question. And it's interesting because I think you uh, answered that question in a way as you asked it, because one of the things that I have started doing, I really learned, I heard an athlete being interviewed on television or radio or something, and she had just gone through this training program that was sort of focused on the mental part of her game. I can't remember if it was a basketball player or a tennis player. It was a woman athlete. And they said, well, what was the biggest thing you got out of this program? And she said, it used to be before the game, I would always be saying to myself, don't screw up. That wasn't her exact word, but don't mess up. And I'd be saying, don't mess up, don't mess up, don't mess up. And she said that increased my anxiety. And she said, now that I've been through this program, before a game, I say to myself, how do I want to show up? And I picture a look on my face, and I have a couple of words. I want to show up ready. I want to show up calm. I want to show up curious. I want to show up listening. And the reason this comes to mind is because just in the last 3 days, I've had 3 meetings. Uh, um, I've had 2 meetings in the last 3 days that were quite tense, where I was people I love and I'm and I work with and I'm close to, but I have had a different perspective than they did, and I knew I was going to lose I knew that I was not going to get my way, but I also felt it was important that they understood uh, what I was saying. And so I was in this situation where I didn't want to be defensive. I didn't want to hurt anybody's feelings. And I just had to keep asking myself, how do I want to show up? Because that's the thing I have a bit of control over, or I don't have control over how they're going to show up, right? But if I can focus on how I want to show up, and then what I can do is I watch myself veering from how I want to show up, I can interrupt myself and say, I'm really sorry. This is not how I want to show up right now. Uh, I'm sorry. I want to show up as a calm person, not as a reactionary person. And if that kind of language helps you, what I'm saying is I don't get it right all the time, but it's way nicer to be able to correct myself in the middle of it than to stay awake the next night thinking of how badly I blew it because I just went from bad to worse. And making mistakes like this is how we grow. This this is how we learn to recalibrate these inner parts of us and learn to function as a integrated, connected human person becoming. So I hope that helps. It's such a good question.
Hi Brian, my name's Colin. I'd like to start by saying thank you so much. I've been following your websites and listening to your podcast for many years now. It's changed my life. But
Oh, thank you.
not so much a question as a comment. During our time of reflection before, when we were asked to help us to see, I sort of prayed, Lord, help me to see. But you can say help me to see, it's a sort of open-ended question. It might not relate to anything. But what I was praying was, Lord, help me to see. And I thought, help me to see my wife, my three boys, my grandchildren, the pastor who I don't quite, who doesn't fill my spiritual needs necessarily, those in my church community who I tend to not to agree with so much. And that places it in a different context.
Yes.
You're thinking about people, and I started tearing up because it reframes the whole concept. It's not a vague, just help me to see. So that really grounded it for me. But the problem I have is, I think, really is that at the time when you find you have that inner churn, you're sort of clashing. I can't respond in that space. I have to take time to think about it. So that's basically the comment I'd like to make.
It's beautiful. That's so beautiful. And I'm glad you bring up, Cole, sometimes it's the people closest to us, our parents, our children, our coworkers, our spouse. And what we get into these dramas with them, where now they're my rival, now they're my competitor, now they're my problem, now they're my attacker. And now we're only seeing them through this very narrow script that we're writing, this very narrow drama that we've constructed. And when we can, and this again is part of how contemplation helps men change. It helps us step back and realize, oh, hold it. I'm only seeing them in this very, very narrow way. And how can I just see them for who they are? And listen, we can go through days and weeks and months when we forget this. And we get a person into a certain role and we stop seeing them as who they are. So what a beautiful thing. Help me see my wife. Help me see my children as they are. And sometimes that brings great pain. I just was with a dear friend whose adult daughter has a serious mental illness, and he struggled for so long to, think we'll get her better, we'll help her get better, she'll conquer this. And now he's told me he's just reaching the point where he's being able to look at his daughter and say, my daughter has a mental illness, and she's in all likelihood going to have this for the rest of her life. And it's my job to help her live with this mental illness. And it was like, it was part of his grieving process that he first denied that she had the illness, and then he was angry that she had the illness, and then he was bargaining. How can we fix it? How can we fix it? And he said he's now coming to the place where he sees her as a beautiful person, not as somebody with something wrong with. This is her story. This is what and it could have been me who was born with this illness. And now I want to love her as she is, Man, these things are hard. But thank you for bringing that up. It's so often the people we love, it's why we hurt them, because we are seeing them through our biases and through our own interests. And we need a higher perspective. So thanks for that, Cole.
Thank you.
you so much, Brian. We might break into small groups now. I understand you've got some prompts, some questions for us.
Yes, let me bring those up right now. You can go in any direction you would like to, brothers, but here are a couple of questions that I think a good starting point could be: what are you feeling and thinking after this conversation and after doing that guided meditation? Just what are you feeling and thinking? And just to get a chance to let things out, can you share a story of a time when you just didn't get it, when you didn't see something? And what happened? Tell the story. Uh, Third question: how could others, family, friends, men in your circle, help you to better face your biases and help you see reality more clearly? Like if you were to say to the other guys in your circle, "Hey, look, here's how I think you could help me," um, and then you might ask that question to the others: how could I help you? What could I do for you? And to actually, not to turn this into theory, but you looking at the other men in your circle, is there a way I could help one of you as you try to see more clearly? So I invite you to start easy. What are you feeling and thinking? And then see if you can get to the point where you start telling each other, here's how I think you might be able to help me. Here's how and if, how can I help you? So that's the questions. And I'll leave this up so you'll be able to see it and make use of it and go wherever you want in those, see where the conversation leads you.
Thank you, Brian. What we're going to do now, guys, is grab 3 or 4 people around you, go and find a space in this beautiful. So before you head off, though, Brian, we just want to thank you so very much for what you've brought to us over these past 2 days. I don't know, for myself, I've learned a lot. You've brought a fresh perspective to me. I have benefited for a long time from the things you've had to say. Really, really grateful to be able to have you here with us this weekend. Why don't we thank Brian?
Thanks, everybody. Thank you. Thank you. It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me. Thank you.
We're going to grab a few friends, go and find a space in this beautiful site. When you hear the drum, we'll be heading in for morning tea. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, bro. To go up and check the size of the dress. I call Steve my screw sauce. Remember him? Or do you want to sit outside somewhere, mate? I don't really know. No, I need to stretch it tiny bit first. You want to stay here? Yeah. It looks like some guy should take the chairs out. Yeah, it's like the speed, but yeah, do a stretch. Okay. That might be easier. Good old chair trick. Oh, you did stretch it out. First question is what are you thinking? Oh, yes, yeah, I got it. That's all right. Questions. Thinking it's one chance and 6 for the
Yes, that's probably one. Yeah, okay, so I've got the question, so we'll do that. What are you feeling and thinking after this conversation and reflection? What are you feeling and thinking after this conversation? I just shared, I'm just like a computer. It's got, when the wheel spins and it doesn't work. Yeah, that's me. I'm just there at the moment.
Taking the way the process.
I think probably the whole weekend was caught up with me this morning. You know, and it's just, I'm now just about like almost overload. Yeah. So I'm sort of glad that we're on our tail end.
Well, it's not a 5-day decision.
I'm happy like waiting drifting along and just other people, just being part of it. It's just been, I'm not a parrot out, but I've just, like I come here and I use generate, like I get things from you guys and then I go away and then it's a year and I come back and I go, why haven't I done something this in a year? I know all the things, like you said, you know everything, but now I'm sort of I've got to get out of my comfort zone and do things. That giving back's a great idea. For you, mate. I will fill it up if you just come over. Yeah.
So do we have permission in future? What if you implement it?
Yeah, no, that's fine.
We better get this Brisbane group going, so
Well,
just so we can get on.
Yeah. Well, that's just one of the things. That, I like that. I'm gonna sort of gear up as just to help us.
Sorry, very good. Challenge by what right through. Grateful for that information. All those different ways of devices. And so whether I'm being prideful or not, I don't know, but I don't think any of them kind of whacked me between the ears. So what's terrible with this? So rather than a question about how can my brothers help me with this, I skipped down to the fourth one. How can I help you with this? I'm right in the thick of some of this. back to my old suburb, my journal group, so you don't enjoy this kind of thing. So, this is just a parody. But yeah, after a middle of the world, that group spring up, yes. And as I've got more inclusive with people and other ideas and other faiths and other denominations, some of the guys in the group have become less so, and more rustful. Well, you know what I mean, like nothing's going to shift it. So over the last few years, I've just innocently raised questions about there is an accurate conception. The assumption in the book. I just start with the group anyway. And these things. And everything. So I would have read Joseph had a really good one.
Yeah, I'd love to have
But if she,
yeah, that's fine. Yeah,
just sounds like I don't know. But I don't, so I don't like, but I find it strange that the church would say, you must believe this, or you're not. So if I do it, as tactfully as this really China shop can do it, if I ever raise these subjects in German, but I tell my mates to start. And the day's not out before the big email comes. Encyclicals, popes, and God knows what. And I left last week in the aftermath of one of those big emails. Surprised I'm too busy preparing for this weekend coming up. But I look forward to comments from other people. Maybe I'll rejoin the conversation when I come back. You see, I think a lot of those understanding of those biases is going to help. And if I could help break open some of those things, the other guys in the group, I think it might help them too. You know. So anyway, it's just really topical for me. It's just really topical.
I moved you go back to
The Gap. I lived in the Gap for about 40 years. And my number one and favourite daughter still lives in the Gap. So about every second week I go back there for Sunday Eucharist. And they're very social, networking people. So they'll invite a few other couples for a brunch. With their children who are my grandchildren's age. So it's quite lovely, and I really love that. I go back to the Western history.
I started to realise that, and I think it's right, that McLaren was talking about that bias, you know, that it occurred to me, you know, that we've all got the story. So you I'm the story of all my insecurity. All of them. And my wife's got there. And my wife, sort of a group story. This is our story. Never really bothered much about it. Yeah, it's all there. Little storage going on. It's open air. Birthday like that. Oh, yeah. Anyway, that's what's happening. That next door, basically. It's a big dynamic. It's a huge dynamic. You know, it's just never been through. Yeah, totally. I guess, yeah. I love the whole business. Yeah. Took it to life. What a wise thing to say. So, but, you know, I don't know.
Not the only one, you know. Like for me, it's quite often a lot of stuff bubbling up to the surface. Not particularly this week. Coming on. Just life at the moment. That's why the sun, going real well past the year, you know, and our daughter that has given us grief home for all these years. He was a pig and ship with a little baby, you know, and her and her partner, they're going great. They're struggling, you know. All those worries, you know, you think, gee, if they rent, if they get kicked out, where are they going to move? And I'm thinking, well, we might have to get a lace of house and drive me to insanity, you know. You know what I mean? If they got kicked out, you know. Yeah. So, yeah, I spent, you know, we just might go over. There's another one. Can you share a story or a time when you just didn't get it, or when you didn't, and what happened? It's a bit of a. I'm wondering whether we might just bypass that one and go on to the next one, which might be a bit better, just in case we run out of time. How could others, family, friends, men in the circle, help me better face my biases and help me to see more reality more clearly? Oh, well, yeah, it's a group work, you know, but it's something you could question this now, you can take it back to a group. How could others, family, friends, men in this circle, help me better face my biases and help me see more reality more clearly?
The very first thing to share is information. Discuss it. It's in private. And this,
Constructive, you want to call it constructive conversation. It's not, you make you a dickhead, you know.
So as you said, if there's an emergency situation, then response.
Mm.
It's not like things.
yeah.
Don't-
Six of the Enneagram, what does the church say?
I have actually said to one or two people, myself, I've said to people, one or two, I see you say, I'm questioning this, and by my questioning this, I'm rattling your cage. But that like, that's probably my shadow coming out too. Oh, I can push a few buttons.
Brian expressed it something like,
Yeah.
thank you for trying to. But,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
you try to help me.
I don't expect you to understand.
Yes,
Yeah, that's
yes,
right.
I don't, yes, I don't demand or expect you to understand what I'm doing. But in fact,
Come over to my house for a mushroom.
I don't cook anymore because it relieves me of those temptations. But oh, boy, Lisa, thank you very much. Yeah.
I guess the most important thing, you've got to have the same space first, not the same space. Then you can tackle those things. Whatever, you know, or it appears to me that you're a little bit, you and I are on a different seeing of things. But I actually wouldn't want to turn around and say that I'm biased. But like that, I'm actually getting biased. Say,
Wow,
yeah,
I
yeah,
see that a little differently.
yeah.
Try and fix your money.
Yeah.
They're all
Wow, I see things differently, Ken. I'll get the whippersnipper out as well, you know.
Yeah. The thing is, not just confining to my example, which was pretty much a church example, but in all of our relationships, it doesn't hurt to remember church structures. An era is coming to an end.
Oh, yeah.
If you meant to
Dom said it, yeah.
the bishops at the conference by lunchtime, they agreed well, about working there. Really and loving and living with guys that still love that structure. Yeah. And that's all in it. You know, I've got the gold, I'll give it to you, accept it, give in.
Yes.
You know, we accept you in to say but you've got to toe the line. You've got to believe what we believe. Kind of stuff. That's gone on for centuries. They don't just change overnight.
Okay.
No, but it is for some of us. But as a conglomerate mob, right? So you like to believe in a church. It's not going to change overnight. That's the environment we're in. That part of society, it's affecting other parts
Yeah,
too.
yeah,
You know,
yeah, I
things
see
are
what you
changing
mean.
rapidly.
Yeah.
And some people are ahead of the game, some are just keeping up, and some don't even know
But
what
even
the
though
game
it's going
is.
on. Yeah.
But just take things like the yes referendum, the same-sex marriage, abortion legislation, the controls, mandates, taxes and sanctions, that stuff. It's changing really fast. So
That's why we've got a lot of mental health.
It's a little bit less of society we're living in. So, it's been a tread through that deep. As loving as we can.
One of that sorrows manifested itself in the gut. But the DV thing, as Johnny Gunner said yesterday, tackling DV the way they are isn't going to solve the problem. You know, that's what we were talking about. It's just, got to get dealing with men, not just the symptom of it.
Rob mentioned that yesterday as well, that, they send them back, but they're on that ascending journey. And none of that's going to work for them. Like they're not getting anything new in their toolbox. They're just going to come with the bars again later. Yeah.
What do you think, Michael, about it? With the question through.
Oh, the last one.
Yeah. Well, the four questions were, what are you feeling and thinking after this conversation and reflection? Question 2 is, can you share a story of a time when you just didn't get it, didn't see it, what happened with others, family, friends, circle company, better face my bias, and help me for how might I help others is the fourth one.
Yeah, no, it's kind of relaxing the head. Why I told you that change what it's like.
That is good.
But I'll have to.
Just put it on and put it on while you bed at night. Mate, if you want to, look, I tell you what, there's one or two people that occasionally preach at the Vineyard Church. If you want to go to sleep, come to church. One of them, I call it the, no, I say to Donna, the insomniac dream and preaching today, you know. And, and then sometimes we just, one or two of them don't go, but church starts for me after. Yeah, many
One situation, why did you get it between the wife or long time ago? The door was still open. She said it was. I think they. Prostate was pretty bad. Pretty much empty. Had a form of boy. Stakes are pretty high, but I'm 7 year old.
hopefully, well, I could, I thought it would be. So it's not better for the boys. I could have done it. But, a lot of pressure on. It might be partnership with the two other that. So it's just a didn't need a broken marriage. Oh, it's like trying to reconcile marriage.
Yeah, just working out my thing for now. Just working out my workshop.
So, yeah. The 42. No, yeah. 42. Yeah, the boys are conversating. And they, you know, in spite of all of that, actually get on all right. They like the, yeah. Bonnie made me think. Where are you? But he was more but I, you know, sort of had to do relation. But I got on well with Sue. Walk through it and go, oh, I got told, I had a real great sort of doing all right. Anyway, that's, yeah. Sorry, I'm spared you. But after this weekend, ready to like crossroads now. So ready to like kind of feel up.
You can use some spurs though.
Yeah, it's not a good. And I'm sure that both my show up with system. All right. Since February 12th, I've got the new people. I was prepared to get back to my set up just to meet my people. Thank you very much. Very selfish, I am.
That's the pain level.
Well, that's what nurses are. And the one of them scale is 1 to 10. Anything under 3, I'm not worried about. So if you don't want them to take out the ship, until you're ready.
Yeah.
I made the mistake once, being the optimist. Oh, let's get through it. Yeah, okay, this one, yeah, okay, that one. It's always the same. Exactly. So then, if you please ask me a question, you have so I don't tell all my mates that are going to have the operation.
I've seen my younger son. He said he was on the strip. And how I said to him,
I've got myself in happened last year to push the Trinity Sunday ceremony at the cathedral and it's the worst. You end up with all these really extra, I saw them. It was a bullshit stuff that I did for 2 years. And I've got rectangle job free. And I'm stuck by pieces. I've got room and birds. So how would I access that?
Yeah, I can. I've packed them away, but I can grab you one if you want to. If you did want to buy the book. So if you just paid Caroline, yes. Easiest thing to do. I'll go grab one out of the car.
Almost always when I break these days,
Yeah.
It's saying the whole point of sanitary framework.
Yeah.
Then I know it was kind of drawing in. Two things. Before anyone who has worship, 50 minutes worship, worship. We have now we find that in the market. We have the shower and the anchor. That is the temperature. We have and we have
Oh, what a waste of time. Let's practice.
Hey fellas, do you want to bring, let's gather around here, maybe bring your chairs up close, and just go wherever you want here, would be great. For a few minutes. However we can.